A very warm welcome to today's episode of the Aligned Founder podcast. I'm joined with Renee, my co-host, co-founder, for a very interesting dive down the rabbit hole. What are we going to talk about today?
The dark side of breathwork. Yeah, I think it's going to be a juicy one and an interesting and a very important one because there's a few topics we learned in the last few months that are important to address for anybody who's considering doing breathwork and understanding what they're getting themselves into, what to look out for, and yeah, that's what we're going to do today.
And regarding who this is for, so if you're someone who's never tried breathwork before, maybe you've done a bit of Wim Hof or box breathing, or you've tried some, YouTube videos about breathwork and you're interested about doing it for stress management, this will be quite informative for you. And if you're someone who has already tried connected breathing and, lying down for long periods of time, looping your breath and maybe getting into weird altered states, this will also hopefully bring a lot of light to your past experiences and also maybe help you find a way forward that's going to be really supportive. So really it's for anyone who's interested in health and well-being and stress management, all that kind of thing. So the way we're going to do it is we're going to open the box as to why we would even record an episode on this topic. So why do you think this for you is such an important thing to talk about?
It's very important because people don't really know what breathwork is, first of all, and all the differences. Some people come and said, oh yeah, I tried breathwork before, and stating it as it is a fact, but breathwork can be so different. It's the same if I would say, oh, I have been eating what one person ate an apple and the other person had a steak and seafood. Like it's completely can go in opposite directions. And that also is in terms of the outcome and how you actually breathe and the impact it has on you. And I think people really need to understand that this is not the same.
Totally. I think a lot of people could look back on maybe their first relationship and say maybe that wasn't the most aligned relationship I've ever had, because they didn't really know what they didn't know. So they just kind of went out into the world and said, I'm looking for love. And then the first thing that felt or looked like love said, great, you'll do. And then afterwards they learned some things that gave them more experience and insight. And I think the same can be applied when exploring the personal development or specifically the breathwork industry, because someone steps into a new field that they've never explored before and they say, oh, well, it must be all the same. And then once they maybe dive in, they realize that not all, breathworks in this case are created equal. Or it could be applied also for coaches as well, So in any industry, we want to have a few different metrics by which we can discern who are the people who are really integral and worth their salt and, are going to really support someone on their journey versus people who may have bad intentions, but often don't, maybe just don't really know what they don't know. And they're just kind of doing the best they can, but they are potentially creating challenge or maybe more long-term effects negatively in clients without realizing. And that's something that I think is really important to talk about so we can better educate people on how they can do what's best for them.
Yeah, and spoiler alert, our method is the best.
That's, just give you the punchline right away.
That's like, basically, I do think that it is that way, but I also recognize that it's silly to just assume that, and I think we're going to try our best to explain as to why we believe that the way we do it is actually the right way to do it. And it doesn't mean there's nobody else out there who is doing great work as well. But and also for me, like, to be honest, I was lucky that I fell into this particular school with you in Bali because I had no idea of the differences. Mm-hmm. I couldn't have told you in the first week of training that, oh, this is really good, and maybe some other online training that I was advertised that I saw is not as good, because I simply didn't know. But now, knowing what I know, having worked with hundreds of people, seeing the differences, hearing also the feedback from clients that have done other forms that weren't following the same guidelines that we do, that actually had negative experiences, that came out anxious. So like there's a lot of stuff around that. And again, like it's not blaming anybody who did some kind of education and now is really excited about doing this work. It's just important that there is risks involved as well, and that we try the best way we can to educate people, to ask the right questions. If you're considering doing breathwork, going to a practitioner, maybe things you have to look out for in order to understand what you're getting yourself into.
Totally. So I think we'll start with just a very brief overview. So in episode 2 of this podcast called What is Breathwork, I went like on a deep dive of like really explaining all the different styles. And so if you're curious to learn more, you can go to that episode. But we'll just give a quick overview just in case someone is like really wants to get to the juice. So the first thing to consider is with breathwork, am I going to do a mind-based or a body-based breathwork? So mind-based would be something that many people have tried. It could be anything from doing the breathing exercises on their, Whoop app or whatever, or a YouTube video, or Wim Hof box breathing, or yoga techniques. So anything that involves using my mind to control my breathing. And that can be a really nice tool to use in the morning or the evening to create more balance or activation or relaxation depending on the exercise. So that's something I was doing for some years in the past, and it made me feel better. And if I felt stressed, it would help calm me down. So that's something that we're actually working with companies as well, teaching them techniques, how they can manage stress, and like more in acute settings to like almost like a bit of a quick fix. So that's one side of the equation, that's mind-based breathwork. And then the other side, we've got body-based breathwork, which is what we do on a deeper level with clients, and which is the one that creates a bit more controversy, because there's with something that's more effective and powerful, the dark side of the coin is it can also be more potentially creating more challenge and also opening up more stuff that if someone doesn't know how to deal with it, it can create negative effects. It's like with great power comes great responsibility. So the body-based breathing involves lying down and looping or connecting your breath for an extended period of time, maybe over an hour. And in that time, ideally, we would be dropping into a slightly altered state where our breath changes our blood chemistry and our brain state. And in that, we can start to bring up and re-experience and hopefully let go of things that are stored from our past. So that's why connected breathwork versus mind-based breathwork is such a powerful tool. And like I said before, if used in the wrong way, it can also create a lot of negative impact. So that's kind of what we want to explore today and give a few guidelines for how you can approach this if you're going out in the world trying to give breathwork a try.
Yeah, that's right. I think the body-based breathwork as a practitioner requires way more skill because it goes way deeper. And as you say, where there's potential reward, there's also risk. And the mind-based techniques off of YouTube, that's some simple tools that anybody can use on a daily basis. I do that as well, but I always like to give the example between mind-based and body-based, that the mind-based one is like almost like a painkiller, like a healthy painkiller, of course. But let's say I get triggered about something or I'm nervous. I'm like, okay, this doesn't feel good. I take 5 minutes, do a mind-based breath work, and I'm feeling better already in that moment. However, if the same thing happens tomorrow and the same thing triggers me, I will have to do it again and again, like a painkiller.
Yes.
And the work that we do is designed to, hopefully, over an extended period of time, you won't get triggered by the same things as much anymore, and you won't need that painkiller in order to regulate yourself because you're just meeting life in a different way already. So this kind of like simple overview.
I think another good example I like to use, similar vibe, is people who don't get enough sleep and then use coffee. So I feel tired, I drink coffee, I feel better, therefore it's all good. But then that creates a reliance over time when we're not looking at the underlying cause of the fact that you're tired, Yeah. So basically by dealing with the sleep issue and by improving your, restorative sleep, whatever your rest, then you don't necessarily need the coffee. You can use it as a bonus tool to feel better, feel good, but it's not a reliance or an addiction almost moving towards. So regarding connected breathwork, I know that you had because basically the story is I was in Bali. I had been really trying to find something to help myself feel better. I'd been living in this kind of chronic fight or flight state for many years without realizing it was just how I saw the world. And I had one session of this connected breathwork in this way that works really in tune with the nervous system, and I just felt completely different, and it really opened the door. So I started to do this work every week and started to notice the shifts and changes in my system. And again, I had just stumbled into this guy's office and tried this, and it just happened to be a really aligned practice. So I got quite lucky as well. And I remember telling you about, hey, I did this breath work, I'm doing it, it's amazing, you should see if there's one, because you were in Kiev at the time during COVID, or like later into COVID, and so I was saying you should find if there's someone near you. So I think you had an experience then in Kiev?
Yeah, I did, and it was already It was cool. I enjoyed it. But now if I can compare to the work that we're doing now, it just goes way deeper, because in Kiev it was looping my breath, yes, but it was without body work, and it was without really taking into consideration the nervous system. And now looking back also, there were a few people who really got emotional, but then there was not the relevant support. And for me personally, that wasn't an issue, because I was pretty solid in my breath. And for me, it was actually, the issue was on the other side. I couldn't access emotions for quite a long time.
Yeah.
So for me, I was just cruising in the sessions. I felt relaxed after, which was something already that I couldn't achieve with meditation. I was too impatient. Mm-hmm. So it was a new tool that gave me some relief to some extent, and I liked it. But again, there's still a huge difference between that and what I thought breathwork was then and what we're doing now.
Totally. So when we go into the topic of connected breathing or body-based breathing, I want to kind of paint a bit of a picture of like the map or the landscape of what's out there. Mm-hmm. So I think what really varies, because there's many different types, and people are like, yeah, I've tried like psychotropic breathwork or shamanic breathwork or rebirthing breathwork or holotropic breathwork.
I sometimes don't even know what it is. They come with new names all the time.
Yes, somatic relevance breathwork, whatever it is. You know, there's new names. It doesn't really matter what the name is. There's a few things you can look at, okay? The first one is, I would say, what's the deeper intention behind it? And a lot of the times the practitioner might not even know what their intention is, because they've just learned what they've learned. But the first thing I would always look at with connected breathwork is, what's the intention behind the practice? Okay, so I would say for the vast majority of practices on the market, the intention is to create a strong altered state, where basically someone is pushed to the top of what's called their window of tolerance, or what they can really cope with. And the goal is to get them into such an altered state that it basically blows them out of any sense of themselves. And then through that, they might move into some emotion or big experience. And then they may have some healing or catharsis or release that comes from that, which is associated with a positive outcome, and that being like a good thing for someone to do. So if we approach it from a lens of like, okay, by creating a big experience, someone has what looks like or sounds like a big release. There's emotion, there's screaming, there's movement, and then at the end they feel differently, then that would be a good result. Great, okay? So then we would just optimize for that. So then by optimizing for that, we're going to want to create the biggest experience possible. We're going to want to breathe as long, as deep as we can, and we're going to want to have as many emotions and sounds and moving as possible, basically. And that's kind of like our barometer, or our metrics by which we measure that experience. So within that realm, there's many techniques. I think holotropic would be a main one. And the intention of holotropic is basically open mouth, bringing as much breath in and out of your body as you can with force. So that would sound something like for maybe an hour or more. Okay, so you can imagine that would be quite altering, maybe quite challenging, and quite taxing on the nervous system. So within that experience, someone would probably get into some pretty altered states and experience some things. Now the question is that going to create positive long-term change in someone's life? What do you reckon?
I was going to say, maybe you can add what you experienced in Portugal. Because you said there were because for some people it can actually be a positive experience,
sure,
but for some it is not. And if you invite 10 people for dinner, and you know that the food you're going to serve them, 2 people are going to get sick from it, but you don't know who, you're probably not going to give the food to anybody, right?
Yeah.
And that's like kind of...
Even if 8 people enjoy it.
Even if 8 people enjoy it, yeah. So yeah. I remember this.
Sure, yeah. So the thing was, I had trained in we'll say the other side of the coin, which was like the more nervous system informed, which I'll explain shortly, but it was less intended around creating a big experience. Like that could happen, but it was en route to better groundedness and embodiment and regulation in myself, and letting go of deeper stuff that was stored. But that wasn't necessarily the point. It was more about working with the body and changing the function of breath versus creating a big emotional experience as the outcome. So then after doing my training and being educated, I kind of went out into the world kind of going, oh, wow, this is cool. Like, you're doing breathwork too. Great. You know what I mean? And like starting to try these other styles of breathwork. And I had a number of experiences at different retreats, different workshops where someone's like, yeah, we're doing breathwork. And I would drop into the session as a participant, very open-minded and kind of like, okay, let's see how other people do it. And I was really, really shocked to see the kind of like what was happening in those sessions and how far away it was from what I had known. Like it was a completely different world, and it was basically what I mentioned before. The intention was like from the word go, just this driving of people, breathe more, go more, like pushing people. And even when I could hear, because I was trained to like basically read and work with breath, and working with someone within their window and like keeping them in an area that's actually stable and they can like be balanced and grounded in themselves, hearing people completely blow themselves out of what was capable for them, completely overwhelming themselves, and coming out the other side. And you would have, of course, a group of people who were saying, wow, so powerful, I left my body, which is basically disassociation or checking out, which is like a freeze response, but that's another story. So people would be going off to these amazing places, or they say they cried for the first time in 10 years. So wow, so powerful, And then I'd be like looking at the other side of the room to the two people who were sitting in the corner shivering, just like completely not in their body, kind of shaking almost and like swaying back and forth. And then they'd be like off by themselves after and just completely not grounded. And then I think the cherry on the cake was this retreat in Portugal I did last year, which was a music retreat, which was like 85-90% of the experience was really positive, but there was a breathwork segment, and I was saying, oh, interesting, maybe I can help out if you need. They're like, no, we're good, we don't need help, we got this. And we went into this like breathwork session, and like when I say it was like driving people way beyond what they were capable of, it was on another planet, this was. And, then speaking to the practitioners after about like how challenging that would have been for people, and how I could see 2 days later, people still not in their bodies and grounded and back to themselves and still almost kind of like re-traumatized in a way. They basically dismissed the whole thing as like, yeah, it's all healing, like it's all medicine. And, maybe you need to get out of your head and this kind of thing. And I'm like, well, like you can see the evidence right there. That person was completely fine, and now they're like fried. And there was a complete avoidance and ignorance of wanting to look at that.
And I think here we enter the topic of today, the dark side of breathwork. Because if you look at it from a business perspective, as a sales pitch, and also from a fulfillment perspective of somebody feeling like they are doing powerful work, of course, a big experience sells the best. If somebody experiences something so emotional that they haven't experienced in a very long time, it's going to be in whatever way wow and intense for them, and the practitioner can feel, oh, I did this, or I was a part of this, on the one hand. And on the other hand, it's easier to sell this in whatever way, be that retreats or packages, in comparison than if somebody says, oh, this was a really relaxing experience, even though maybe this was what they needed on that day and it serves them way more. From a sales perspective, people need the big experience in order to believe in that this thing works. Yeah. So I think, and here, that's like the big thing. There's a few other topics, like, for example, doing very big group sessions, doing online, but it has happened several times to me now that clients have come to me, or maybe friends of client who really recommended it to their friend, and they say, oh, my friend doesn't really want to do it. They did breathwork before, they didn't have such a good experience, they didn't feel safe, they went into panic mode. But then I was able to explain why that was, because again, for some people it's totally fine, and they're going to have a good experience and they walk out fine. But then if there's other people who may be already quite sensitive or going into some emotion that they weren't ready for, and then you're in a room with 50 people and you don't get the necessary support, and then your body becomes afraid, and then the breathing pattern of fear is breathing even heavier, so it just amplifies that.
Downward spiral, yeah.
Yeah, it's a downward spiral, and people come out basically completely dysregulated. And what we're trying to do is the complete opposite, is to regulate the nervous system. And sometimes that is a session where people only feel relaxed. And sometimes this is a big emotional experience, however, with the necessary support, with the necessary integration. And that's then what can create positive shifts, not just what sounds and looks good on the surface. And as you say, it's really easy for a charismatic practitioner to say, oh, it's completely normal that you feel bad now because you opened this big thing and eventually it's going to heal you and stuff like that. So you can always find a way to explain it away, kind of.
Sure, yeah. Totally. And because being in a position of power means that people like outsource authority. It's like, if you went to a guy who called himself a doctor and had a certificate on his wall, maybe he's only done 2 days of training, but if you believe that he has authority or power, then you'll listen to what he says and maybe apply it to you, and maybe even disregard your own inner intuition or voice of like, oh, that didn't feel right, doesn't feel safe. Oh, but he told me it's fine. Oh, well then, you know what I mean?
Yeah.
So that's a different topic.
But again, I just want to say, like, there's no, I don't want to blame anybody or everybody who is doing it that way, because first of all, if that's what you were taught by your teacher, that, oh, it's okay, they just have a emotional experience, they're going to be fine, then maybe that's what you really believe. Mm-hmm. Or you choose not to look there because you can choose to focus on, oh, well, I'm helping people, maybe it's true for most of them, mm-hmm. and those who are not, you just decide not to look there.
Yeah, blind spot.
Yeah, and keep going. So I get how this can happen, and at the same time, that's why I was so glad that the training that we did was so many hours with so much integrity, and also forcing me to first work on myself, to really take myself to my deepest, darkest mm-hmm. alleys inside of me, and really to be able to relate to people, to see what it's like, to be in a group of people where also I hear the other shared experiences, to see what it can look like if somebody is overwhelmed, and how then they were helped to integrate it, and just going through all of that. Because if you see a 2-3 week online practitioner training, I now know, going through all of this in person, this is virtually impossible to get this kind of level of experience to guide people through this deep process. It's just not possible, even though if there's a great teacher and gives great insights about how you should breathe and how you should tell people to exercise the practice. That's one thing. That's the easy part, to learn how to breathe or tell people how to breathe. It's all the things around it that really makes a difference.
Totally. So on that, I think we're kind of like semi-touching some of these core topics, and I'd love to like dive in and really name what are the key pillars that someone can look for if they're like either someone who's going out on a journey of doing connected breathwork wherever they are in the world, or if someone is interested in diving deeper into this, like what are we really working with, and what is it that is important to us, and how does that differ from some of the other styles and practices out there. So as I kind of mentioned before, the first thing I think that can be different in the different styles of connected breathing or breathwork is the intention of the session. So I think a lot of styles, like maybe 85-90% from what I can gather, focus on creating this big experience, and that, as I said, is optimizing for the peak. It's almost like the Hollywood explosions, like, wow, it looks so amazing, and that's why that like big action thrillers sell, versus the very subtle, slow moving. However, does that make it more profound? Maybe not. It can be a lot of explosions and things that look cool, but is there any substance happening underneath? So when we think about creating long-term shifts in the nervous system, on the left-hand side, that's kind of what we're looking at. We're looking at, okay, what does this person need in order to come into a more balanced, regulated, whole version of themselves with more capacity to go out into life and do the things that are important to them, with more enjoyment, and then to be able to afterwards rebalance, rest, regulate, switch off the mind, drop into the body, let go of stress. And then whatever journey they need to go on to get there, it could look many ways. It could look like lots of emotion and maybe anger or sadness. It could also look like deep rest because they haven't rested properly in years, So to say that the pathway to whatever destination has to look big is to completely avoid this other side of the spectrum, which is the basically the personalization of someone's journey to what their body really needs. And that's something basically that we train in, how to read someone's breathing and then how to change it and support their nervous system to coming to a more like balanced version of itself. Versus then if you've got like, let's say, people doing online sessions on Zoom where there's they're not in the room with people, so they can't read their nervous system or their breath, or these big groups, like we were joking just before recording, I got someone followed me and they were posting videos about supporting 90 plus people in a big group breathwork with like 3 people supporting it, And I don't care how much superpowers you have. There's no way you can keep track of 90 people or even really 20 or 30 people without adequate support. Like the ratio we would use is like 1 to 4. So 1 practitioner to maximum 4 people breathing. Because that's actually to be able to keep track of what's happening in 4 different people's systems at the same time is still a lot. You know what I mean?
Yeah, even that, like I'm doing mostly one-on-one sessions here in Berlin, and I feel the difference between having the time and space to focus on one human laying there, and then at the retreat, for example, where there's 3 or 4 people for 1 practitioner.
Yeah.
It's definitely possible, because also the circle experience has some other benefits to it.
Yeah.
And maybe we don't go as much into the breath mechanics there. It's more like holding the space and containing and keeping it safe. But yeah, it's a difference. I feel even with 4 people, I really have to focus to be able to provide the facilitation that I want to provide for each breather. And I can't possibly imagine a room of 20, 30, 40, 90 people. Like that is just, yeah.
It's wild. So the analogy I'll use is, you know, if I wanted to have my spine readjusted, I could go to a very skilled chiropractor with, you know, many years experience who really understands how the body works and, you know, works with the person to really, you know, realign, even if they've got underlying conditions, that kind of thing. Or I can go to Southeast Asia, down a side street and get some random guy to crack my back. You know what I mean? And maybe it works, or maybe not, but what's the risk? And basically, if you're doing group breathwork online or in large groups where there's not a support of like 1 to 4, 1 to 5, then you're basically on your own, okay? And there's a capacity to open stuff up that there's not going to be support there and safety there for you to move through, which can lead to creating more challenge and even potentially re-traumatization from those experiences. So yeah, it's the one-size-fits-no-one approach, as we say.
Yeah, and then here we talk again about the emotional part of a breathwork journey. But then again, episode 2 with Pete, where he talks about like the details of our work. But then, as I said, there's much more to it. We actually read the breath. We try to get people's bodies to remember how they were breathing when they were babies, like with a perfect breath, breathing in all body parts, and have a relaxed exhale so that we can in general walk through life more healthy, also on a physical health level. And for that, we actually read the breath. Okay, is the breath moving into the belly, into the chest? Where are the challenging areas in the body? And then with touch and with pressure, we actually actively work on that. Whereas most breathwork practitioners that use touch, if they do, it's more like simply to just support, to say, hey, I'm here. Maybe a hand on the heart, which in an emotional moment can help, but it never takes into consideration the other part of the breath mechanics and the physical health part of it. And I think you haven't told me the story about yesterday. You said there were...
Yeah. So that's a beautiful segue into like pillar number 2, which is basically knowledge and experience and the level of training which breathwork practitioners typically undergo. So you mentioned before, there's lots of ads on, you know, Instagram or whatever, especially if you're listening to this, you're probably going to start getting targeted ads from random $97 breathwork practitioner trainings. But, you know, so there's a lot of trainings that do a 2-week online or a 5-day in person, become a breathwork facilitator, you know, and I often see them posing with their certificates and stuff on, you know, various social media platforms. And, you know, that's typically the standard. There's no real regulation, which has positives and negatives. But the point is that anyone can do a 2-day training and call themselves a breathwork practitioner. And what I liken that to is basically the equivalent of me, you know, doing a Udemy course on surgery, okay, on open heart surgery. I then go on eBay and buy myself a surgical knife. I then advertise on social media that I'm now a qualified surgeon. I then invite you to my house. I lie you down and I cut you open with my surgical knife. And then I don't really know what to do because I've never been trained in how to actually stitch someone up. So I can't just leave you there to figure it out. And that's basically what's happening with most connected breathwork, because people are trained to open someone, which is what the breath will do. It's very powerful. And they're not trained how to spot what is happening or how to basically fix it or complete it. So you're kind of leaving people in the dark by themselves. And some people can get through it because they've got better ability to self-regulate, but others don't. And that can create a lot of challenge. And that's a lot of the people that end up coming to us. And that's purely down, I think, to it's not that these are bad people, like these practitioners that go and offer big groups or, do a 2-week training and stuff. They don't know what they don't know, They're blissfully ignorant, and it's coming from a good place, I believe. Like, they want to help people. Maybe they had a nice experience and they want to really give that to others. And I think that's beautiful. But I think the challenge with it is by them being told by their teachers, who probably also didn't do that much training and were also told it was fine. It's kind of like a hand-me-down of these like negative or like, I would say, more ignorant beliefs. And the thing is, like you said, that there's no intention to use body work or touch work or knowledge of the nervous system to create change in someone's system. It's more towards this peak experience. So at the moment, I'm teaching a training. It's 3 people. It's a small group. Had to turn a number of people away who I felt weren't really ready on their own personal embodied level to really hold space for others, even though it's an 8-month training. Okay. And within that, there's like online 2-hour classes on learning about trauma, the nervous system, how to read breath, learning about emotions, learning about how our body regulates itself through stress. Then we do a number of weeks in person, full days, hands-on learning facilitation, as well as doing their own personal processing work. And then there's also then working for a long period of time under supervision with clients and getting feedback and oversight from mentors. And then there's again deepening, again going into more intermediate advanced stuff at the end of the process. So, there's one of the participants who had already actually done and was a breathwork facilitator training and was already offering breathwork sessions and had breathed a ton of people and also in groups. And after doing the online part with the education, and now after doing 2.5 weeks in person, she's like, kind of like,
and
wow.
that's just not even halfway through the training.
No, it's like
not even close.
We're 2.5 months into it of an 8-month process. And she's like, holy crap, I had no idea, how much was actually under the surface. She's like, when I would use touch work, we were taught, it's nice to put your hand on someone's shoulder. It makes them feel nice. Oh, maybe you can touch the ankles. It feels good, versus actually any awareness of what's happening in the body or the nervous system and how to use touch and verbal cues and support to help them, to basically guide someone through a very challenging experience. It was basically, again, she didn't know what she didn't know. And she was out there offering sessions, and it was coming from a really good place. But I think now, opening the box of what's possible, and we're only 5-10% into it as well, she's already like pretty stunned. And also, here's the kicker, how deep she's been able to go in her own journeys now that like she has got proper oversight, because one of her things was like she had learned a certain way of expressing herself which felt comfortable, so that was kind of like her go-to. And with basically mine and the other facilitator support, we could say, hey, actually I see how your body has learned to do this, we're going to take it this way now. And now the level of depth she's getting to the journeys, because we know how to read the nervous system and how the body adapts, we can now guide her even deeper into her process and to really completing some really old emotions and letting go of some pretty interesting past experiences and seeing the impact that's now having in her life. It's pretty interesting.
Yeah, love that.
Yeah.
Some people have also said, hey, why don't you offer training to way more people and doing it online? Like, obviously, there's a lot of people making a lot of money on that now, and you could with your training.
Good, yeah.
So why only 3 people?
Yeah, well, that's kind of like pillars 3 and 4 in one, and I've kind of touched them already. So pillar 3, I'd say, is safety and integration. So mixed with also, the level of education and standard of education, I believe that we can only really learn how to read someone's nervous system in being with someone's nervous system in the room and touching it and feeling how breath is moving. Like, how can, it's like trying to explain, snow to someone in Zimbabwe. Maybe not Zimbabwe, it's pretty close to South Africa, but I'm sure like in a very hot, I think Bali is where typically we use like, I can describe snow all day to that person, but until they actually touch and feel and experience snow, they're not going to know what it's like. So I can describe to you on Zoom or in a online funnel about how the diaphragm and how breathing works, but until you actually get in there and put your hand on someone's diaphragm, you haven't a clue. It's a completely different beast. And then try touching 1,000 diaphragms and see how you go. So that's really the level of depth that we're working with. It's not about theory or more like cognitive stuff. It's ultimately embodiment, which is pillar number 4, which is I'm not, I believe, qualified to hold space for someone else's processes if I haven't done my own work to get myself to a place where I can contain, I can be aware of most of my own patterns and shadows so that it doesn't dirty the space, so that my stuff doesn't come up into the room. So let's say I have an avoidance of anger because I grew up believing anger is wrong and bad and I was shamed for it. Then I do a 5-day or a 2-week training where I'm taught you can just put your hands on someone this way and this is how you get them to breathe and then this is how you sell it online. And then someone else's anger comes up in a session. Subconsciously, my body doesn't feel safe with it. So what am I going to do? Without even realizing, without meaning any bad or harm, I'm not going to feel safe and therefore I'm going to shut it down. I'm going to say, stop, that's not good. Now you should be more at peace. Now that's, you shouldn't do that basically. And because I'm in an authority position, that person's body was ready to maybe bring up and let go of that anger that they could have been holding for years. And because I hadn't done my own embodiment work, I hadn't dealt with and sat with my own anger, then I'm not willing to allow it in the space. And it reconfirms that story for that person, that their anger isn't good or welcome. So even what I've realized is, ironically, even if I wasn't ever to breathe anyone ever again, because of the level of embodiment and awareness of the nervous system that comes from doing this work, even if I was to just do online coaching, the level of depth that the processes could go to in terms of guiding someone to understand themselves is so much deeper because I've just gone to that level of myself and seen it with others. So to answer your question, why would I not teach online? I think, it's one of these things that now I know what I know. Now I know about how powerful it can be and how life-changing it can be to be with someone in a space and really support them from a place of having done my work, knowing how to hold space cleanly, how to spot and read and complete what's called trauma cycles or stress cycles in the body so someone can let go of old pain and emotions in a safe and healthy way and integrate it. Now that I know that, if I was to then sell that, it would be kind of like me becoming a drug dealer in a way because I know it's not right. I know it isn't going to it's going to potentially create a lot of harm and challenge for people. And I could make a lot of money, but I'm just not going to be able to sleep with myself. So that's kind of why I'm doing it the way we're doing it now,
And also, I want to speak to something about this podcast today. It's actually been a topic that's been lingering around for a few months. And even last year, we were already talking about it. And I had really resistance talking about this publicly, because I thought, it's not nice to talk bad about other practitioners, or even people who say, of course you're going to talk your product and your method up because that's your business.
Yeah.
So it can.
It's all an elaborate plan. That's what we're doing.
Yeah. No, but it can look bad.
Sure. Yeah.
And there's also my patterns of not wanting to be perceived as a bad person.
Or hurt other people's feelings.
Hurt other people's feelings. Yes. But now, having done so much work here in Germany and also on the retreats and seeing all of the offers that are out there, I just said, and also now with our audience growing, being covered on the big podcast, having more and more clients, and also wanting to have wanting to provide this really high quality service, I realized it's actually our, what's the right word? Duty, to talk about this. And it's no longer, I don't care if some people don't like it or if they feel offended or if they think, these guys just talking themselves.
Live and let live or whatever, yeah.
Yeah, or, talking from a place of, we think we're the best. It's not about that at all. It's actually really important for people to know. Yeah. Because there is such a big difference. Yeah. And it can change your life in both directions depending on who you go to. And again, we are for sure not the only ones who are trained to help people, but I still recommend you come to us.
If you're in Europe anyway, or Berlin. Yeah. I think within that, I think what you're touching off there is this idea of integrity. you know, because we have a lot of, like, all of our clients, the majority of our clients are entrepreneurs, founders, very business minded, like creative people. They see opportunities and they're trying the product, they're coming to the retreats or whatever, and they're like, guys, this is fucking awesome. Like, you got it. And they're seeing the dollar signs almost. And so it's almost like, as you said, our obligation to see where it could go and how we could scale, inverted commas, and actually...
How often have our clients said to us, how can we help you? Or what ideas to scale this? Because that's what the founders world is all about, like scaling. And we're just like, well, we just got to charge a bit higher prices, but we can't like...
and it's different, and there's even an ethical piece around that, because a lot of people on the other side of the coin say, how can you charge high price for this, because people need this work, you know? And at the end of the day, there's this balance between, you know, yes, I could train 50 practitioners online, and then I'm, you know, spreading the good work, you know, you could say. However, I'm also potentially leaving a lot of damage in my wake without realizing. So for my karmic footprint, I kind of need to know that it needs to be small groups. So like I said, 3 people, with people who have vetted in advance to make sure, because here's the thing, I've, you know, been a part of a number of practitioner trainings, and I've also seen what happens when someone who means well and is in the right way, but hasn't done their own inner work enough, or they have enough underlying stuff. It's a very challenging personal process to become a facilitator, truly, because you need to embody it, and that can be a difficult journey for some people. So I've seen people drop out. I've seen people, you know, kind of it be too much for them. So I've really kind of taken people who I believe have the capacity and the humility and the integrity to become great practitioners. And, you know, the business will have to wait for January or February until they're ready to actually work with people. And in the meantime, you'll just be a busy man.
Yeah.
Working within your window of tolerance, of course. So just to close this out, I suppose, I think we've kind of said everything. And I think the main thing about this is, if you're a listener and this has piqued your interest, you're curious, as I said, I would just be, first of all, tuning into what's your intention with, if you're going to explore breathwork, what's your intention? Is it to really have a big peak experience? You know, for that, you could also go and, you know,
take mushrooms.
Yeah, mushrooms, ayahuasca, go to Peru, go to the jungle, you know, they're also great. Even, you know, I make the joke of like, take ayahuasca and get in the roller coaster and something's going to happen, you know? But a lot of people would maybe shy away from that. But then it's just breathing. What's the worst that can happen? Yeah. You'd be surprised. So within that, if you're curious, first of all, checking in with if your intention is to have a big experience, or is it to really create deep lasting change in not just your body physically, but also like how you deal with your emotions and how you deal with your thoughts and your inner critic, and, you know, really creating deep behavioral change as well as nervous system change. And then also looking at like, what's the level of quality I want to work with in terms of someone who's really, you know, professional, or someone who's just kind of done something quickly online, and someone who can really maybe embody what it is they're trying to talk about, or even teach me or hold space for me in.
And even, I mean, that's not the main topic of this particular podcast, and we haven't talked about it at all. Just to touch on it quickly, is that we started with breathwork when we started Really Align, and we also said, okay, this type of breathwork combined with bodywork is already different and powerful.
Yeah.
But we also decided after a few months, actually, we need to include the coaching part as well, because of all the big things you learn. And then if you don't have a game plan on how to actually understand and implement it into your life, it also takes away from the profoundness of the experience. So that was a learning process for us too. So I wouldn't even say now it's only the breathwork, it's also the support of the coaching element. Yeah. So it's as important. Yeah. Really.
Totally. Yeah. Well, I think that's a nice place to wrap it up. This has been fun. I've really got to vent all of my triggers on this topic, so I feel great.
Hope we didn't offend too many people.
I hope we offended lots of people, especially the surgical knife and the drug dealer analogies. If you've enjoyed this, you want to find out more, you can, you know, find us on LinkedIn, Pete and Renee. You can find us on, you can go to our website, reallyaligned.com. Listen to more episodes. Number 2 is a good one as well. What is breathwork? You know, as always, we're running our retreat, so you can come see us in Berlin for some workshops or one-on-one sessions, and book a discovery call and see what happens.
Yep, sounds good.
We'll see you in the next one.
See you guys.
You.